No, the image behind me is not my image. It's actually a photo, an image of Dr. Viken Cheterian, who hails from Lebanon. He's Armenian, who is a political scientist, also a journalist who's covered extensively the South Caucasus region, and who's now an academic at a university in Geneva, Switzerland. But then you might ask, and justifiably so, why is there an image of Viken Cheterian behind me in this 25th episode of Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenian matters? Well, the answer is quite simple, actually. I came across an interview that Dr. Viken Cheterian had given to CivilNet TV in Yerevan in Armenia with Emilio Criccio, in which he basically discussed once more the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh, the drawbacks, the failures, the hopes and frustrations associated with that conflict, the second war in 2020, that pretty much resulted in a painful but clear defeat by Armenia in its war against Azerbaijan, and the loss of a substantial amount of territory during this war. Now, I will not comment on what Viken Cheterian said or discussed with Emilio Criccio in his CivilNet TV interview. I will simply post the link to that interview in my description box. It's about 22 minutes, and you can watch it. You can decide what you think of it yourselves. And I'll also add the Twitter handle in case you would like to follow some of his tweets as well. In addition to that, since I'm talking of description boxes, I might as well say it here and now. In addition to this interview, I will also post one other link. So altogether, only 2 links in this 25th episode. The link is an article by Dr. Zedes Andrew Demirjian from Los Angeles. He is the author of a book, if you've heard, The Demon in Diplomacy, in which he talks or postulates a positive sum plan for Nagorno-Karabakh. Again, you can read that article and you can make your own mind up. And just to complete the picture, between inverted commas, that image I have of Viken Cheterian, I borrowed it from a tweet that he himself had posted during the week when the COP26 meeting was taking place in Glasgow. Now, there was a lot in that interview, as there is in the article by Dr. Demirjian. There was a lot in that article that caught my attention, that made me think. And I dropped him a line in which I said, I'm going to record a YouTube episode in which I'm going to make a couple of comments, reactions, not necessarily positive or negative, not necessarily critical or assessing the interview, no, just reactions that were triggered in me as another fellow Armenian, as I listened to his answers to Emilio Criccio. The bits that really caught my attention were toward the end of the interview. Why? Because in my opinion, that bit of the interview touched not on the fact that the conflict had lasted for well over 2 decades between the first and the second wars, and that the Armenians and the Azeris had not actually been able to sit down and find a peace plan for Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh in Armenian. That is not what I'm going to talk about, nor am I going to talk about what he mentioned, interestingly, about the pressures that both the political administrations in Armenia and Azerbaijan face and have faced in relation to this conflict, which might explain some of the actions and reactions that have been taken by both countries. No, I'm going to talk about something else, and that is how we Armenians, and I'm Armenian, so I will stick to my own ethnic reactions rather than start commenting on other people's, how we Armenians sometimes tend to encourage passionate reactions to situations, and in the process, we also tend to sort of frown upon those who call for rational and dispassionate analyses of facts. Now, this happens across the board. I've seen this happen with populist politicians who want to sort of get popularity and support, so they start using big words, passionate expressions that have little to do with reality on the ground. I've also seen it with church leaders who get carried away and suddenly forget that they are church leaders and think that they are Armenian Fidaeins, or ordinary Armenians, men and women, who in their conversations not only become excited and passionate and forget to analyze critically situations, but they get so emotional and passionate about things that they basically veer away into a different direction in their discussions and their assessments of everything, from the genocide of 1915 all the way to the second war in Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020, as well as other issues relating to Armenians and particularly to Armenia itself. So being passionate is a good thing, but in the process, anathematizing and ridiculing those who prefer to look at facts, who tend to go away from that populist emotional reaction, that is not right either. I'll give you my example. For those of you who don't know me, and there are lots of you Armenians who don't know me, I ran the campaign for recognition of the Armenian genocide in the UK for a number of years. I had a board, two chairmen of the board, the late Dr. Rostom Stepanyan, a wonderful cardiologist from Iran who was settled in London, and then followed by Rafi Sarkisian. Now, during the time that I ran CRAG, I and my board and my team managed to achieve a measure of recognition of the genocide in Scotland and Wales. And those of you who know the United Kingdom know that that is not easy. But I also failed to make any progress, very little progress, in fact, in London at the House of Commons in the Parliament. Why? Because there were very few supporters in Parliament of the Armenian cause, very, very few indeed. They could be counted on the fingers of one hand, and the Turkish, pro-Turkish influence and lobbying power were far, far superior to that of Armenians. But during the whole course that I was running CRAG, I often questioned my own position on the genocide. I often questioned what we should do in order to fold that page of history, It's not enough to say, oh yes, recognition, and that's the end of the story. That is not the end of the story. In some sense, that is the beginning of the story. But the question is, how do we address issues? How do we address conflicts? The same thing happened with Nagorno-Karabakh. When I was doing my one-year master's in law, my LLM in alternative dispute resolution, which is a fancy way of saying conflict resolution, I wrote a treatise on international law and Nagorno-Karabakh in conflict resolution principles. And I tried to be as objective as I could. And whilst many academics praised the treatise, the work, and the late Catholicos Karekin I even went so far as to say that he wanted to publish that treatise, there were many other people who took me to task and who basically poured scorn on my thoughts because I was not being totally one-sided and totally devoid of rational analysis. But you know what? I didn't care then, just as I didn't care when I was running CRAG, when people basically heaped scorn on some of my views. Why? Because I believe that I am no less Armenian because of my views. And I am comfortable enough in my own identity that I don't need to shout it from the rooftops, sometimes to the annoyance of the neighbors. Self-examination is fundamental in our lives. It goes back to Greek philosophy and comes back to the 21st century. We need to self-examine before we examine the other. And by being critical as well as praising of some Armenian actions does not mean that we do not see what is wrong with the other side or the other sides. But as I often say in my episodes, as somebody who belongs to an Armenian ethnic community, I feel I have the right to speak out my views on Armenian matters, even though I very clearly also admit, whilst recording this YouTube episode, that I know far, far less than the likes of Viken Cheterian and many other names I could recite on issues ranging from the Armenian genocide to the Armenian church to the situation in the South Caucasus and Nagorno-Karabakh. But that is not the issue. The issue is that there are variables, there are a few assets that one needs to deploy. And one of them is a critical analysis of situations in order to be able to reach a plausible and workable conclusion. I used to say this to Dr. Rostom Stepanyan, and it used to amuse him no end. I also used to say it, by the way, to Archbishop Nathan Hovhannisyan when he was the primate here in the UK and Ireland. I used to tell them, don't expect me simply to toe the line because that is the party political line or that is the ideological line. I have a brain, a small brain, but a brain nonetheless, and I will apply it. And through it, I will be able to draw my own conclusions. Now, enough of this, because I don't want to give you the impression that this YouTube is some sort of a defense of my own positions. It's far from that. The image is not me. The subject is not me. But I just wanted to open this bracket in order to also lead to a question. And the question is, based on what I saw from the interview with CivilNet TV, based on the articles I've written and read on the Armenian issues from Karabakh to genocide, how do we understand nationalism? What do we understand of nationalism? I understand pressures, I understand frustration, but for me, nationalism becomes very dangerous when it is translated into jingoism. And that is where popular reactions differ. Popular perceptions also differ between Armenians in Armenia, and I'm convinced of this, and Armenians in the diaspora. So it is important to give equal weight and equal measure, not just to be dismissive of a whole cross-section of society because we, you, I disagree with them. Now, there are rumors that a new tripartite agreement, Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, is in the making. And there are studies galore that are coming out, some of them serious academic studies, others more like sort of social media chit-chats on situations. Go to Reddit, go to all the other social media platforms, and you'll get plenty of that. But there are serious studies, and there is talk of a new agreement that is in the making. My question is, and I haven't seen it, I don't know what's in it. How will it serve the purposes of conflict resolution? Now, when I was doing my LLM in the subject a few years back, some of the principles that we dabbled with were that a conflict is open to a solution when it reaches its peak. A conflict is open to solution when there is an acceptance of one party of the other, when there is an acknowledgement of painful compromises that need to be done. I hope that in the spirit of conflict resolution, that Armenians and Azeris would at long last realize that they cannot maintain a bellicose history for years and years and years and years and decades on end. That no matter how long or how short a conflict, it has a starting point and it has a more indefinite ending point. We've seen this across history. We've seen this in many continents and many parts of the world. So the sooner Armenians and Azeris stop the I hate the other attitude and start thinking of how to move forward, knowing full well that the other side might not actually be receptive, that is the beginning of a new configuration, of a new model that might actually appear. And I will end by saying that, as far as I'm concerned, it's Armenia, Yerevan, Armenians in the Republic, and to a lesser extent in Karabakh, who decide on the final solution. They're the ones who've got to put their signature on the piece of paper. But the diaspora, we are the ones who can inform, who can help. So the diaspora has to understand that Armenia has to take the decisions. But Armenia, politicos and others have to also understand that Armenians in the diaspora have a say, and they should be heard too. Bring those two together, and perhaps we might be able to overstep some of our emotional reactions. Sometimes even I've seen it, histrionics, and come to a better configuration of what to do with the Karabakh situation, just as we've been discussing and dabbling over the genocide for well over a century. Why? Because whilst it is easy for me to sit here and sort of shout and condemn and ridicule, the people who really count are the people who are feeling the daily impact of these conflicts. And they include the people in Armenia and much more the people in Nagorno-Karabakh itself. So thank you to Viken Cheterian for his interview and his many, many write-ups. And thank you for listening today.